Okay, good morning, everyone. Good morning, Deb. Looks like the sun is up early in New Mexico.
You're muted there, Roger.
Oh, right. Okay, good morning. Morning, Deb. So the chapter this morning is about, practice is about your life. And she starts off saying, practice requires continual return to exploring. And I strongly agree with that statement. I have kind of a different way of exploring. I'm not so interested in lists and labeling systems, but what seems to be more important for me as I get old, I used to say older, now I just say old. I prefer first embodying the recognition that we are the awareness that knows our experience. And, simultaneously, along with that, explore the nature of this awareness, this kind of space-like awareness, and the qualities of this nature, this Buddha nature that we call. And it's like, what could be more important, especially when we're in times of like uncertainty and things going on that we can't, it's very hard, if not impossible, to have confidence in people who are supposed to be in charge, that they're really in charge and they know what they're doing. So what could be more important than to explore the nature of that by which we know our experience? And here we're not talking about, conceptual knowledge, although we use conceptual knowledge, but we're talking about knowing in the sense of experiencing, direct experiencing, being open to direct and in-depth exploring of our experience, knowing in the sense of being aware of or witnessing this awareness and our experience. So, I gave a talk at the Southern Palm Group last week on the 3 pure precepts, and I wasn't planning to talk about them in this talk, but I think it's appropriate. And I wasn't really aware of what the 3 pure precepts are, but in Reb's book, Being Upright, which is the premier book in Buddhist circles on the Buddhist precepts, the 3 pure precepts are: embrace and sustain forms and ceremonies, embrace and sustain all good, and embrace and sustain all beings. So, of course, being able to fully feel the depth of our experience is, paramount and essential to exploring and expressing our understanding in our daily life. And that's embrace and sustain forms and ceremonies. That's one way to say it. And then basically, he's saying that the main message of the 3 pure precepts is refraining from evil. And what he says here, he says, the root of all evil is misunderstanding the nature of self and other by actively ignoring the interdependence of self and other. Evil comes from turning away from the vivid world of creation, where the self can never remain separate from other beings. It's a denial of the ever-changing flux of sensory experience. Evil is a turning away from life. The full realization of refraining from evil comes with waking up to the teaching of interdependence. And for the second pure precept, the practice is practice all that is good. embracing and sustaining all good. And it means to wholeheartedly live life based on freedom from the illusion of an independent self. It is to awaken fully to the interdependent self and to express such a self. So what's interesting about this to me is he talks, he quotes Dogen at one point. And so Dogen says, this teaching, this is in one of the chapters on the 3 pure precepts. He says, Dogen said, this teaching is of unsurpassed, complete, perfect awakening in the path of practicing and being practiced. So what came up for me, in actually the title of the second pure precept is embrace and sustain all good. But he made, in his chapter on this second pure precept, he made embrace and sustain all good, the second pure precept, he made that the subtitle of the chapter. And the title of the chapter is The Practice of Practicing and Being Practiced. So he's making that, essential point that practicing is letting Buddha practice us. In other words, it's the surrender of our separate self to the Buddha, Dharma, the reality, and that which knows our experience is our Buddha nature, is our true self. That's who we really are. So one thing that Joko mentioned here in this chapter is we don't want to look at our real self where we're suffering and struggling, and I understand what she's saying here, but actually that concept of being our real self is of the imaginary. That's the imaginary self. And I don't mean to be critical of her, because later on in the book, I haven't read ahead in the book, but looking through the book, I think she gets into this stuff about, the recognition of our shared being and the importance of that later on. So, but the point of, the 3 pure precepts, embrace and sustain these all good, basically. Embrace and sustain all the different practices and the depth of our spirit of inquiry and realizing the interdependent, the ever-present, unconditionally accepting nature that supports us in being able to, live, receive our true life that includes all of our suffering and our struggles. Receive it and supports us in the process of how the practice of all good, the practice of not grasping, not turning away, and fully receiving and cultivating the freedom to fully feel our life is the way that we cultivate that stability that she talks about. She says, which is really true, that that it's not enough to just, I forget how she said it. Let's see. Well, she said that basically the practice gets wider and wider. We need to, the horizon of practice gets wider and wider, and there's no end to that, which is very true, So that opens the way for the rest of the book, I think, that we'll explore and see more of that. But I wanted to I want to explore a little bit about embracing and sustaining and practicing and being practiced. Being practiced, to me, illuminates what he's really talking about in terms of embracing and sustaining. So here in Buddhist practice, embracing doesn't mean reaching out and trying to embrace something outside us. It's the realization that the inner world and the outer world are both boundless. So it's more of an opening of our heart, an opening and embracing the Buddha nature that is calling us, that is living our life, that is the real identity that is our life. And Suzuki Roshi had an interesting chapter on what he called God giving. So he didn't talk about God that much. I think Thai talks about him more, but he did say that every existence in nature, every existence in the human world, every cultural work that we create is something which was given or is being given to us, relatively speaking. But as everything is originally one, we are in actuality giving out everything. Moment after moment, we are creating something, and this is the joy of our life. But this I, which is creating and always giving out something, is not the small I. It is the big I. Or you can call it God or Buddha nature. Actually, so many Buddhists I know, when you talk about God, they get uncomfortable. And it's like, what's the problem here? They think he's talking about something external, whereas like the whole rest of the book is obviously not. But we're so conditioned to think of God as in dualistic terms that once we no longer do that, it's hard to go back and realize that he's not talking about something dualistic. What is actually giving is not the small I, it's the big I. So the big I, which is actually one with the I that we call ourselves every moment of our life. Every moment of our life we're I, whether we're a small child, on growing into adulthood and into old age. But the real I is the I that we share together with all beings, and it's the power of all beings that helps us to develop and fully receive that stability, that stable sense of being, so we can rest in our essential being. And one other thing I thought was interesting in the chapter that I really agree with is that she said that when she's talking about the substitute life of our different matters, different ways we protect ourselves from the pain of our core belief. Our core belief is really, for all of us, is the belief that we're this separate body-mind, and we all, express it in different ways and live it in different ways. But she says that practice itself can become a substitute life, and I think that's true. I know it was true for me. Another way of saying it is we indulge in spiritual bypassing. So, I think that's pretty much all. I mean, there's a lot more I could say about it, but I'd like to open it up for discussion at this point. Thanks.
Thanks, Raj. Thanks for putting it in context. I really appreciate how you brought in Reb's work and the pure precepts. I woke up in the middle of the night to read this book so I could be here, which is, I apologize for being late, and I fell back asleep, and I was like, what? After all that? And I will say that I'm having some resistance to go back, and I'm exploring that, because I don't know when we read Kwang Roshi or even Thich Nhat Hanh or anybody else prior to reading Ben's work, I had the same kind of expectation of grounding in some form of the. So I don't want to be unfair to her because she's a woman. Because we have different expectations for who is the writer. But there's part of me that's like, where is this coming from? You know, and it's true. It is really true. A lot of the stuff that she's saying, and it's real, you know. So maybe that's what I'm having resistance to. But I like how you put it in the context of the ing, the exploring, and she says that as well too. The being, the experiencing, you know, all of this, rather than this kind of sense of like a separate self or a what does she call it? The artificial self, the substitute life. The substitute life seems to me like the delusion where everybody causes all the problems that we have, you know. But like you, as I heard you say, it's imaginary. That small I, the construction of all these things that I want to appear like, and the performance is imaginary. But likewise, she says the real life is the one we don't ever want to face. We don't want to face that place where we're stuck, hurt, and miserable. We certainly don't want to just rest in it. And so we cruise right along. We all have our little drugs, our way of staying in our substitute lives. Because the desire for something that feels good is so strong in us. The discipline of practice can become, if we're not aware, a substitute life in itself, you know, speaking to the spiritual bypassing. So, I mean, that so-called real life, I guess, that I'm gonna experience, that I don't want to, you know, I think this is so true. You know, I can look at my life and I could be very judgmental of my life when I was in the substitute life and when I was in the so-called real life, and it could get really sticky and ugly. But this sense that you brought up of it's imaginary. This real life is not even something in my head. You know, it is just, for me, it is this experience of not thinking about which life I'm supposed to be living or which life I'm living right now. I'm not thinking when I have the experience of the real or the transcendent or the big I or whatever. So it gets a little confusing there for me. And the other thing is like, well, why the heck would I want to be out of my substitute life? You know, she makes like this big I, unsubstitute real life or whatever you want to call it. She makes it sound like so unpleasant, you know? Like if it was pleasant, why? Okay, so the substitute life is the artificially constructed because the other one is so unpleasant. Well, why the heck would I want to go there? You know? I mean, it's more this, you know, I would like to hear something more, or what would be more helpful for me. Again, I don't want to be overly critical of her, but I'm like, what? Why the hell, you know? Like, how would you even teach that? You know, like, give up your give up your lovely drugs and, you know, fast cars and women and whatever else. And join me in hell. Well, how do you even translate that? You know, here we are. You know, and a lot of people kind of have that idea. I've noticed, like, as I've kind of left the so-called, you know, substitute life of Miami and come here, they're like, oh. Yeah. You know, no nothing, you know, no fun, no sex, no pink flashy clothes, you know, whatever, you know. And what do I say to that, you know? I mean, this chapter hasn't helped, you know, but I think this is the takeaway. The lack of expectation of what anything is going to do for me had, actually before, when I woke up to read this, I had this dream that I was climbing up a hill, like a very, very steep hill. And at the top of the hill was Crandon Park, which is a park in Miami. And there was a woman, and as I was just about to get up the hill, she had on this long black dress, and she came, speeding up the hill, which was like almost like a steep incline. She said, "Oh, I don't want to be the last one," which of course happened to me this morning. But when I got to the top of the hill, I walked along like a cliff, and there was water, kind of like California, and there were all these rooms, and it was like my husband was there, and my mom was there, and I woke up actually like really sad, like what have I done, like in this so-called life. It's painful. It's painful to look at our existence in the substitute life and how much time it takes and how much damage it does. And at the same time, I could say, well, I wanted to get rid of that substitute life of, the kid and the family and all the things that never worked. But, you go anywhere and there's problems, and there's people engaged in the substitute life everywhere you go. And the truth of it is that it's easier. It's easier to have those delusions. Yeah, and the shadow side of them is obviously where we are now. This terrible situation. Anyway, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, wow. I mean, that's because life is really painful, and yeah, I had the same reaction, and there's a friend of mine who lives in San Diego where Joko lives, so she knew a lot about Joko, but she never really got close to her because Joko was kind of a hermit, in some ways. But I raised a lot of the same doubts about her to my friend Nicole, and she said, well, that's because Joko was in hell. And she was really in hell, in different parts of her life. But, it goes deeper. It's like, and part of it for me is not just, kind of portraying, not really offering, when she's talking about this, just offering, okay, well, just sit in your pain and maybe 40 years from now, it won't be there. We need more than that. But the other thing is, when you say it's about your life, the other side of Zen practice is the whole realm of me and mine has to go, the attachment to it. And we still deal with it, but we need to deal with it in that strength, that stability that she talks about slowly building comes from the realization that the power to cope with the pain comes from that place. We don't gradually go there. We have to be receiving it and being supported by it all the time. So like embracing and practicing is really opening to being embraced and being practiced. And maybe she gets to that in the later part of the book, but for me, and I think for a lot of people, you need to hear that simultaneous message each step of the way, It's not something you find later on. It's a gradual, and the way to finding it is boundless. That's true. There's no end to it.
I think also to just be gentle with it,
Yeah.
and see the lure of the drug that is this substitute life. She says, her daughter is writing this book, and she says, perhaps you're in your 30s and you're in the wonderful business of dealing with children, which, as far as I'm concerned, will drive anybody crazy. And she has 4 kids. I don't find that helpful. And that I feel like this is something my mother would say. She did go crazy, But
Yeah.
like in that moment, if I'm 30, help me to wake up. helped me to wake up to the fact that it is crazy making, and it's also beautiful and wonderful and precious, and
Yeah.
like, I don't know. There's something kind of morose about it.
Mhm.
Um, well, you pointed out something, Deb, right? The real life is horrible, so, we cling. I mean, that was a very good point, yeah. Roger, when you said our core belief is substitute, that we're all separate, that this is my big thing, and also that I'm a piece of shit. And that came from my parents and the housekeeper. I had a lot of negative input. So my path, the reason I went to Buddhism, because I thought it seemed the most honest and real. I couldn't believe in Messiah's coming, waiting for the first one or a second coming. I thought, what is that? That made, I can't tell you why, but if I had a I have a resistance to giving up Donna's story. There's an immediate, no, I'm Donna and I'm baby and I'm lovable and and it's giving all that up. And right now I'm having tremendous anxiety about moving, and the anxiety is real, and I'd love something to take it away. And my doctor said, well, when the inner child is acting up, sometimes it's all right to take a pill. So sometimes substitute life, you need it, and that's fine. I don't think it's an either or thing.
Yeah.
But what I do think is so important is that we all feel loved and accepted, that after almost 83 years, that's it. People get, even someone like God, I don't know how to say this, Hitler, didn't feel loved. I mean, what happens along the path, we commit horrendous things like Trump is doing, and it's not just Jews, it's people like the guy in Saudi Arabia that wanted the Ayatollah to fall and all this. I mean, it's just the act of sitting with love and peace and companionship that we can give each other. That's my bottom line for today. Thank you.
Thanks, Donna. Beautiful.
So I'd like to ask a question. How do you know? What came up for me was, how do you know if you're spiritually bypassing? Does it depend on your motivation at the time that you sit? Is sitting just part of your things that you do in your life, so that it's not because of or in reaction to? It's just like brushing your teeth in a way. So no, I think about that even before we started this book. And what I see a lot of people think sitting is about, like what mindfulness is about, is a way to deal with suffering and pain
Mm-hmm.
and finding something else inside that feels different, better, you know. I know that's not, once you use the word better, you're, I think, like on the wrong track or something. But yeah, so if anybody has any input about that.
Well, you know, I think the term spiritual bypassing, you know, is not necessarily what we think it is, but because we all do it. You know, like even in the chapter when she's talking about how we all don't want to be in that life where we're struggling and we're miserable and we try to avoid it. So in that sense, we're always, you know, we're always dealing with that attempt to bypass the pain and the discomfort of life. I think maybe what she's trying to draw attention to is people who have, over a long period of time, become unaware of how they've walled off their ability to feel deeply, you know. So I don't know if there's a way you can, if it would be helpful to like look for ways that you're bypassing. It's just when we're suffering emotionally, I think Reb's teaching is more beneficial to realize that it's calling for compassion, and we need to be gentle, like Deb was saying, gentle with ourselves and accepting, and bring compassion to our inability to be compassionate. You know? You know, exposing the attempts to bypass is the way we can gradually learn to not make that effort to turn away or to try to grasp at something that will relieve the emerging calling for compassion.
Yeah, thanks.
I'd like to add something quickly. So I had an interesting experience this weekend. I woke up on Saturday morning and saw, you know, what had happened, and just a flip, you know, the ripple of my son is in New York, and usually there's the first thing that comes to mind is like, there's usually internal violence, increased risk, you know, threats. He goes to mosque, it's Ramadan, oh my God, you know, that type of thing. And then I had to get dressed and go to work, and it was a poetry workshop with Peter Levitt and Kaz Tanahashi this weekend. And the whole time I was thinking, like, what have I done? What am I doing? You know, I'm dedicating my time to poetry while the world is falling apart. That was what was that was the conversation. As if to judge myself for spiritual bypassing. And I got in there, and Kaz Tanahashi was in Japan when it was bombed. He's been a lifelong activist. And the gravity of the situation came right into the space, and Roshi Joan basically talked about it. Like, this is serious stuff. The little girl's school had already been bombed. There was a woman in the audience. There was like, you know, 200 and something people online, 50 people sitting there to do poetry, you know. So I don't know how she did it, but it's one of the most masterful things I've ever seen. She contextualized what was happening and the truth of that suffering, of what is happening in the world. And then she brought us the group. I was doing that plus, you know, other practical things, but right into the joy of poetry. Doing what you set about to do while the world is falling apart, spinning bombs, children, whatever. Is that spiritual bypassing? I don't know. I don't know what Reb would say about this or anybody else would say about this, but I think, like Donna said, it's okay. I think it's okay to give permission to have pleasure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If that includes spiritual bypassing, then that's a judgment, you know, as long as it's not chronic, I guess.
It sounds like more like a deep willingness to include joy in hell, you know. As Reb, I remember when I was very young, Reb once said to me, "Don't worry about hell. If you're good in hell, then you can get to come back to practice." You know?
I like that, Roger.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it. You know, I was raised Jewish, but I had this. The housekeeper was Catholic, and somehow I picked up all this stuff about hell as a little girl. And that's a horrible thing to have in your head. And I'm thinking about people who were raised Catholic, and that's really a very destructive teaching. And all the religions should just emphasize what I think Jesus, they call him, he was a Jew, He was trying to reform the whole Orthodox tradition of this punishing, insane God. That's what, and bring it to love and caring and embracing each other. This is what I have picked up that from all of it.
Thank you, Roger. Thank you, folks. I'm not sure what I have to offer at this point. I think everything is bypassed. I think what she describes is the relentless nature of us trying to be descriptive instead of prescriptive. Because I think we have this relentless pursuit of describing things, but I think we also, it's like we're always trying to name it or conceptualize it or characterize it or feel it. It's like, all these words, all these things that we do all the time in response to everything. It could be response to nothing. A response, and it basically is, but it responds to nothing, and we start believing it, right? We create these beliefs, and I think these beliefs are what cause the pain with that. And it's a belief about all of it. And I'm not saying that there isn't crazy shit going on out there and destructive and the way it's always been and probably always will be with that. But I don't know, I think she's not describing it in the language. I mean, she's basically saying that we like what we like what we don't like, and then we make up the story. That it parallels that, and that we create the bypass. But we all know the bypass is part of passing, right? I mean, there is no separation of passing from passing, or being from non-being, or death. From it's all part of this of what we do, and I think that piece. I mean, I think part of the difficulty, I think, in reading Joan of Arc is being able to, at times it shines clear. At times she comes across like a Zen master, and then other times, it's weak. You wonder. It feels like a self-help book, where you're looking for, the path, in some way. And I think it's a difficult one to straddle, because I think when we read Ben, or when we read, looking at New Song here in front of me, or when we read David Hinton, or when we read, the language kind of fits this scholarly way, and I think she talks like a woman, like you said, Roger, who, was dealing with my Zoom. And dealing with my Zoom using her daughter, right? And dealing with a husband who was beating the shit out, on different occasions, where she finally gets away from him. And I don't know about you, but for me, raising a child was fucking crazy at times, beautiful at times, and I can look back and say, for raising a grandson, helping with raising a grandson was much more meaningful, because I could separate myself from the 24/7 responsibility, of what happens with a child with that. I don't know. You know, it's. I think you said it, Deb, in terms of it's like trying to what Joan Halifax, you know, was able to do, and I think bring you back, you know, to kind of anchor you, to kind of put the perspective on it in a way, because the despair, you know, I think, I'm not sure where that goes. All the despair I have felt, you know, in all those years of with different things, and I, you know, I like to say, you know, it was pivotal in terms of my getting involved in social justice, and you know, I'm part of a university that was dedicated to social justice. You know, all those pieces, but you know, at the same time, it was being played. I was the instrument through which it was all happening. I was, you know, it was coming to me. You know, I'm not the. I don't feel like. I think when I let go of the doer, and I let go of what it is, in those times when I need to, in order to be able to separate myself from the despair, or separate myself from the depression, or from the insanity, or from my own insanity, not just what I see around, but my own fear of losing it, or going crazy, or having gone crazy, or, you know, being depressed with that, or doing the drugs, and, you know, whatever the bypassing rituals or routines were. But I think it's somehow being able to not get sucked into that, because I think if we start believing in the despair and start, you know, creating that as the mantra, I'm not sure it does anything for us. And I think the bigger piece is to be able to recognize the beauty of poetry, and to be able to feel the expression, and to feel the capturing of the beauty of life. You know, and even that, you know, I'm telling myself that, right? I'm developing this little story of, you know, writing poetry and reading haikus, engaging in the Zen arts, you know. But that's what we do. And we do it about absolutely everything. Absolutely everything. There is no, I think the way out is to recognize that you're doing it, and to not take yourself so seriously, and to, also, that doesn't mean that you don't get involved. You're still involved with that, and we make our beds. Then I don't know, that's kind of where I'm fumbling around.
Okay, I have a poem. Does anybody else want to say anything?
I do want to say something, if I may, really quickly, as Tom was talking. What came up for me, I didn't want to live the pain of reality, which was so, you know, with my childhood anxiety and all. So I developed the substitute self of a crazy person somehow, so that I would be taken care of in a twisted way for the love and stuff that I never got. I was taken care of by the mental health experts, and that maybe being crazy, all the mentally ill, is a very twisted way of looking for love and being taken care of, if that makes any sense. It is a substitute self for the real, whatever the real is. Thank you.
Yeah, you know, I just wanted to say, Donna, even that, excuse me if you're hearing noises. It's like Bodhi's awake. You've awakened Bodhi here. But even that, even all that substitute identity is a crazy, I mean, that's not what we think it is. And, you know, to judge it as something, because look at the depth of feeling and the openness of your heart and dealing with all of it for so many years is so powerful that there's a real benefit to that, you know. It's hard to see, but it doesn't fit into the categories of society's judgments.
Right. Very good, Roger.
Well, I also, when you were talking, Donna, I was just thinking the story that I kind of made up was that there was a part of your authentic self that knew, or your wiser self that knew how to get something different. And it just sounded very profound what you said. But what I also wanted to just say something before we go on to our next meditation. So I don't have a lot of books and knowledge to compare this book to. It sounds more like psychology to me, but also it seems like it's written for somebody that doesn't have a lot of understanding of Zen practice. It feels like it's written to motivate maybe new people to come into understanding what an aspect of Zen practice. So in that way, I think the book is very useful because I think it's like easy to read and understand. It's very repetitive, and that's what people I think need to even accept that they have this other life that's I recognize so much as I was reading in my past, like I could really feel the fake, I call it the fake life. It was, the window dressings and, having to achieve certain things like degrees. I think the best thing I was ever good at was school. It was, and that was like my, that was my drug or something, you know what I mean? That was my escape. But so, in that way, I think this book is probably very useful to a lot of people. I mean, I would recommend it to people that I know that might just be interested in dipping into another way of thinking. There's certain parts that like explain practice so beautifully, I think. Because I know people, a lot of people coming into meditation just really think it's about calm. It's about emptying your mind. It's about being with what we're trying to get rid of or escape. It's a big thing that opens us up to a bigger perspective or a bigger experience of life. So I give it a 4 stars so far.
Thanks, Linda.
So sorry, Roger. Real quick, I just want to put this out there. A couple weeks ago, I think Claudette talked about Fusatsu, studying the vows. So I would just like to put that on the agenda for the future. I know we're over time now for sitting, but if we could all maybe just think about whether we want to do that or not.
Yeah.
Remember that? I don't know what the decision was. Did we decide we weren't going to do that?
And the Fusatsu does, and the way they do it at Boka now, it includes the 3 pure precepts.
I personally would love to do that again as a, to like what you did, take some of that stuff, and even Reb's book would be amazing to bring it back into particularly this, I think would be good. But anyway.
Yeah, maybe if we do another Zazenkai at some point, be good.
Mm-hmm.
Could be a good service to do it as a prelude to the Zazenkai. Yeah. Okay, so I have a poem. It's called Real Silence. Flowing beauty of sound. We arise from nowhere and everywhere, echoing into the boundless. Our waves dance and flutter, light up strings of feeling. Play the chords of our hearts. The soft coo of a dove plays me like an instrument. Silence is our essence, the sound of one hand clapping. Constantly we express the nameless, formless vibrations that mingle all vibrations in the bliss of Buddha's one way of love, one wave of love. Feeling now, all movement is only here. Real silence means there's no place else for the mind to go.